I kind of feel like I just reject partisanship. I refuse to operate in that capacity, which can be very difficult because people definitely, that's their guiding principle. I just think partisanship is a waste of time. I think it is just destructive to our government. I think really what it boils down to as a kid from Bethel is partisanship, is a privilege. It's a privilege afforded to communities that have immense amounts of resources. We don't have those resources at our disposal. I have schools falling into a river. I'm not going to let that school fall into a river.
Hello, East Anchorage. This is Alaska State House Representative Andrew Gray and East Anchorage Matters. The purpose of this podcast is to keep the residents of Anchorage's Campbell Park, University area, Russian Jack, and Unaka Valley neighborhoods abreast of the happenings in the halls of government of our great state. Following today's interview, we will have a legislative update. Representative C.J. McCormick of Bethel is 26 years old and the youngest member of the Alaska State House. Prior to serving in the legislature, he served on city council and as vice mayor of Bethel. Bethel is a city located on the Kuskokwim River. It is the 8th largest city in the state. It has just over 6,200 people. Today, we discuss why his parents settled in the YK Delta, how he ended up in politics, and what it's like serving in the House majority, where he is just one of 2 Democrats. A heads up for listeners. In this episode today, we will be talking very frankly about suicide attempts, and suicidal ideation. If you are thinking about killing yourself, call 988. Someone is waiting for your call. CJ McCormick, welcome to the podcast.
Andrew Gray, I'm very thankful to be here on East Anchorage Matters. Shout out to Betty Davis High. Shout out to the Thunderbirds. Go Thunderbirds, unless you are playing someone from D38.
Thank you so much. I'm sure they appreciate that. Yeah. You are the youngest member of the body.
Yes, I am.
What's that experience like?
I love it. I don't know. I'm ordinary. I don't think I'm weird or different or anything. So my claim to fame is I'm young, and I love that. It's cool having young people come in and look at me and think, oh, this guy's probably in his 30s or 40s. And I'm like, hey, I'm 26. That's really cool. But I think it's very much an honor for me to really be the first Gen Z legislator. District 38 has a history of young legislators. Mary Peltola, who I think at the time was Mary Sattler, was 26 and actually 2 months younger than me. We put him out young.
And you live on the same street as her?
Yes, in City Sub. So we both live on the Pontiac. So she just lives maybe 5 houses up from me.
How did your family end up in Bethel to begin with?
So my mother, as she tells it, she had done a rotation in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
What's her job?
She's an optometrist. She graduated from Ursinus in Pennsylvania, which that's where she's from originally. She had done a rotation in New Mexico and wanted to stay there, but there wasn't really any opportunity for her. So she saw there was an opening in rural Alaska. And so she's, I'll go give that a shot, stay there, see what that experience is like, and then get back to New Mexico. However, she went to Bethel and never came back. My dad, on the other hand, was working for a small motorcycle, outboard motor, that type of thing. And my mom went up and he drove down all the way from, I want to say, Wilmington, Delaware.
Were your parents already together?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They'd met on the East Coast?
Yes. Yeah. They met in Maryland, actually.
Okay. Your mom had this opportunity in Bethel, was planning to just come up for a year, have an adventure, go back. Your dad was just along for the ride?
Pretty much, yeah. He didn't really, at that point in time, have a career that he was super vested in. He had just done mechanic work, and my dad is pretty resourceful. He can fit in anywhere.
They land in Bethel. They obviously enjoyed it. How long before they had kids?
I think about 4 years. If I recall correctly, it was 93, because I was born in 97.
And you're the oldest?
Yes.
And you have a sister?
Yeah, just a sister, yeah.
Tell us about growing up in Bethel. You were born there?
Yeah, I was born, funny enough, I was born in the hospital that I would eventually go on to work for. I went to school, preschool, all the way up to my senior year of high school. I went to school there.
It's an unusual choice for a young couple from the East Coast to go to Bethel and stay. But it probably wasn't unusual to them. They were making the choice that they felt was right for themselves and their future family. What about your grandparents, though? Was there anyone in your
more extended family
Yeah.
that thought, why are you guys in Bethel?
Definitely. And I wasn't ever really privy to those conversations. Much of my elderly family has gone on to pass. But I do know for a fact that my grandmother was very distraught over the fact that her grandbabies were living across the country. And my mom made an agreement that they would visit, I think, every 4 months. And I would go down there quite a bit.
To Pennsylvania?
Yeah. And to visit Delaware, too, where my other grandfather lived. Yeah, it was hard. But I think to your original point about, like, why does this young couple out of nowhere move down there? I think Bethel, especially back then, it still has a lot of these qualities now, but things have changed to an extent. Bethel is just like a really incredible community where there's tons of stuff going on. And my mom always says, like, Bethel is a place where if you want to do something, somebody's just waiting for you to do it, and you have the resources available to you to get it, like, going. So, like, my parents, like, I like to tell people I grew up in the theater because my parents were very big in the Bethel Actors Guild. Bethel really clicked with my parents, and then they raised 2 kids, and that's our home. That's what we know. We have connections to the East Coast, but Bethel and that region is home for us.
Can you tell us about the scars on your forehead?
On my forehead. Okay, yeah. So the scars on my forehead are from halo brace. So when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I had a procedure done to, if I understand it correctly, stabilize dangerously flexible, like, spine. So I have Klippel-Feil syndrome, which is very rare. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I had my diagnosis at birth. Like, they knew right away that I had it because I've joined support groups and things like that, and know that some people unfortunately don't realize they have it till later on in life, and the symptoms start to show. But yeah.
So what is Klippel-Feil syndrome?
It's funny. I've tried to do my own independent research. I've tried to glean information from my parents, and I still feel thoroughly confused. I think it's difficult for me to really know what it is, too, because I don't know if I have the most traditional case of it. But it's spelled Klippel-Fiel. Yeah, that's why I have, like, it looks like I'm cold all the time.
I just Googled it. An abnormal fusion of 2 or more bones in the cervical spine. So it's in the neck.
Yeah. Yeah.
This creates a characteristic appearance of a short neck with resulting facial asymmetry, low hairline, and limited neck mobility.
Yeah.
And they knew this at birth?
Yeah, not really, actually. So as I think I shared with you, I asked my mom for kind of a rundown because I've always heard this story, but it's almost elusive to a degree. But so I was born, or before I was born, like, all the tests and everything didn't show anything other than low O2 levels. I'm going to pull up my phone to make sure that I'm getting this right, because she did text me about it yesterday.
You were born in 97?
Yes.
So I think I probably know when they did the ultrasounds. And then they wouldn't, in my experience, they wouldn't check your O2 levels until it's around time of birth.
Yeah, so that was, I'm looking at the text here, that's how it went. But when I was born with a diaphragmatic hernia. So, as my mom explains it, that's very rare for a child to survive something like that. Like, I should have died on birth.
Because you couldn't breathe without your diaphragm.
Exactly. So I had been in Bethel for a little bit, like, in the hospital, and then they're like, we need to get this kid to Anchorage. So they medevaced me. And
as a newborn.
Yeah. And apparently, like, my mom couldn't even go on the medevac jet because, like, they needed the doctors on there to monitor me. And I'm speaking in very layman.
So a hernia is a hole in a place where it shouldn't be. So my guess is that you had such a large hernia that your diaphragm wasn't able to function correctly. The diaphragm has to move up and down to move air in and out. And so because the hole was there, probably organs were moving across the diaphragm in a way that they shouldn't.
That sounds right.
And you needed surgery to fix the hole so the diaphragm could work.
Yeah. So that was, like, when I was a baby. And then a couple of years later, the scars came from the surgery that they did. I also have a scar on my, like, down in my back where they removed, I think, like, a piece of my rib or something like that to then put it up in the back of my head to stabilize it, because previously there was a lot of danger. Like, if I got hit or something like that, I'm a kid in rural Alaska, we're wild. There's a lot of rough housing going on. So there's a lot of danger that I could have a serious injury. So at 5 years old, I was flown to Shriners Clinic, who
Where's Shriners Clinic?
Portland, Oregon,
Mhm.
which is why I will always love Portland. I don't care what people say about that place. That place saved my life, and I think it's a very vibrant and awesome city. But
So they did a surgery there.
yeah, and that was pretty seamless. Like I didn't remember much of it, and everybody that I know, like my family, are like, "Oh, you're so brave," but it's like, what are you talking about? I laid in bed for a couple of days. People send me action figures, like.
People did this to you, by the way. It wasn't like
Yeah.
you were like 5 years old and saying like, I'm brave and I want to have this happen.
But it was, for what it's worth, I always enjoyed going to Portland. I always enjoyed being at the hospital, which looking back is very strange, but.
So when you woke up from surgery, did you have the halo installed?
Yeah.
And can you talk about how you install a halo and what that actually is?
All I can say from my perspective is I had four screws in my head and like a halo.
So they screw this into your skull.
Yeah, pretty much. And when I went back to school, I couldn't go to recess, I think for 2 years. And so.
Did you have the halo on for 2 years?
No. There's actually a story there too. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm all over the place, but. So every day to like bathe, or when I was bathing, like I had to clean.
And again, I just want to like explain, I guess, for the listeners. So the halo connects to your skull, and then did it also, because the point was for it to lengthen and straighten out the neck, or hold the neck perfectly still, so that where they sewed the bone on, it would heal in a straight line, basically, right?
I assume so.
Yeah.
Again, I was very young, and it's difficult for me to find out the details here, but it actually came
And did you
off.
wear like a vest?
Yes.
It
Yeah,
connected
like
to a vest.
brace.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and everything. It actually came off before it was supposed to. Like every day I would take a shower, and my parents would help me clean it.
So because you had to clean around the screws where they went to your
and
skull.
so they put like a lawn chair in the bathtub, and I would sit in it and they would clean it. And this is not, my parents didn't do anything wrong. This is me. I've always been very like I can do that stuff to myself, but if somebody else like tries to do that, I'll like flinch and stuff like that. And essentially what happened was, in one way or another, I flinched really hard, and like I think the chair fell over, and my mom grabbed me by the halo to try to catch me, and it came out.
Like it ripped it out of your skull?
Pretty much. Like not completely, but one of them was out. They take me to the hospital.
In Bethel?
Yes. And I don't remember much of this, but apparently my mom left. I had the halo in. She came back. It was off. And I was just sitting there eating pizza with the doctor. And I remember it was a white pizza from, at the time, it was Brothers Pizza. It seemed really bad at the time, but they took it off. They called the Shriners, and Shriners was like, yeah, didn't really want it to come out this way, but.
How early did it come off?
I don't.
You don't know?
Yeah. I want to say a decent, like, time period passed with it on and everything, but yeah.
It didn't hurt?
No, not that I remember. I mean, at this point, I was just used to that type of stuff. Even before that, I forgot to mention, like, every night I had to wear a brace to bed. And so I just got used to relative discomfort in that regard. And
preparing for the interview, I had thought that this had all happened when you were younger. I didn't realize that you had to go to school with the halo on.
I don't think it was very long that I went. I feel like it was in the summertime. So the majority of the time I had it on, I didn't actually have to go to school, which was really nice. But
so you don't really remember being self-conscious about it or going out in public?
Oh, not really. No, it's funny. Having a piece of equipment on like that, I don't think people are judgmental or anything. But it's funny you bring that up, because after the fact, really up into my teenage years, I became super self-conscious of my appearance, to the point at which like I remember being at the Holocaust Museum in DC, and like this kid was staring at me, and I was just like, what do you want? And then his dad was like, excuse me? And I was just, I don't know, it just was like really hard. And I was like constantly self-conscious about my appearance. And then also just going through school, like I got called no neck all the time, and people would imitate me, which really, really sucked. But later on, I've started to own it a little bit. Like I referred to myself as no neck all the time, and just in a funny way. And like a lot of the people who made fun of me like became my friends after the fact. So I don't know. In a way, like, to make good of a bad situation, I'm glad to have that experience, because like I think it's given me a perspective on a lot of things, and it makes me a lot more empathetic to people who have similar, or even, I would argue, worse medical afflictions.
And as far as your neck now, is your neck good to go?
I hope so. I think so. Yeah.
It's fused.
Yeah.
Can you do as much with your neck as
I don't know. Like, you tell me.
when I'm watching you move your
Uh-huh.
head right now, it seems like it's pulling other parts of your neck with
yeah,
it.
definitely. I guess it's just not something I really always think about. So
Well,
it's
because it's always been this way for you.
right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, there's just like going through school and stuff. There's always, oh, you can't play sports, or you can't do this.
And what was that a rule after the halo was removed? That
Yeah. Like,
it was like, you're not going to play football. You'll never be a football.
exactly. So as I was saying, like from the first grade, and I remember the day, I don't remember what day it was, but I remember being able to go out and play on the playground in the second grade, and how exciting that was. So I wasn't even allowed to do that. And football is funny that you say that, because I had it in my head I was going to be an NFL player. So silly, but I played football anyways, and I did play tackle football, and I've turned out all right. But yeah,
I guess to get back to your parents,
uh,
and I think what must have been like the most traumatic experience of your mother's life to pull
Yeah.
the halo out.
oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, she's super apologetic about it, to a point at which I feel really bad even bringing that story up. But I think just from what I've heard from her, just asking her, my birth was probably the hardest thing. Just having her child taken away from her, being alone, that whole thing. I just feel really bad for her there, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have your first child on the other side of the country, in a place that you've lived there, 5 years?
You talked about embracing the names that you were called, changing it from a taunt to a nickname. Are you still self-conscious?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've built up a kind of an ability to just put it like, I don't really care. But I feel like anyone who says I don't care, like, that,
They care.
clearly they care. But yeah, it doesn't bother me unless like somebody like uses it as an insult. And the weirdest thing is like strangers will imitate me or something.
Mm.
And I just don't understand, like, why are you being cruel to me? I don't even know you. Why do you want to make me feel bad? But I think if I might, and I don't want to trauma dump or anything like that, and so please stop me if I'm going there, but I feel a tremendous amount of pride now, and in myself, knowing what I've endured to a degree. My birth and being born and like being thrown right into this like survival sort of state, like, it makes me want to value my life more, because for a long time, and many times I've tried to take my own life a couple of times, and I wish I just knew that what I had been through, to know that like I had to fight, even though I was a baby and didn't know I was fighting. I had to fight for my survival, and I wish like when I did try to take my life a few times, like I wish I remembered that, and I wish like I could think about that and realize like you've come so far, like you have earned something. Like, I don't know where to go with that, but
No, I get it. Like, if you, like, why would you throw away all that you had pushed yourself through as
exactly.
a baby
Yeah,
and as a child,
right, yeah,
a small child?
right, exactly.
I don't want to ask things that you don't want to talk about.
You can ask me whatever you want. I don't care.
Were those instances as a teenager?
In college, I mean, I definitely had suicidal. Are you asking me about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had suicidal ideation. I think pretty much all through high school, but I didn't have the vernacular to articulate what I was experiencing. But
And do you feel like it was a difficulty to fit in, or
just I've never really liked myself. And yeah, I think that's it too. Just like growing up in an environment where people belittle you simply for who you are and something that you can't really change. That's really difficult. I don't know if this is true or not, but I always felt like if I tried to tell on another student, I would get in trouble in some way or another. So I just developed an ability to come up with like really biting comebacks and like really throw it back on people, which did me no favors because I only got in more trouble. But
when I hear that, I assume that's happening in Bethel in elementary age, junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in college?
I just, nothing like, no one was disparaging or anything. I just feel like that's really hard for me to figure out why. I guess when I went to college, like I really felt separate from like my friends and family and everything. And I had a friend group, but I don't know. I just really struggled to connect to people and make more friends. I mean, I did for a period of time, and then, yeah, it was hard. And yeah, so like, this is heavy, but it was January 2nd, 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I took a loaded rifle outside. I like shot it across the lake in front of my house and turned it on myself and pulled the trigger, and the gun was jammed. I know that sounds crazy and completely unbelievable, but I don't know what necessarily led me to finally, because I've always thought about doing it, and that was like finally it. I had an argument with my friend, like my best friend, but it wasn't even really that bad of an argument, but I was just, you know what? I don't need to live anymore. I'll just get out of here. Just a burden to people. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. You don't drink, correct?
I used to.
You used to. Were you drinking at that time?
Like in general?
Like, I mean, were you
on that evening?
Had you been drinking that
Not
evening?
really. Like I had 2 Coors Lights.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were basically making that decision sober.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the gun was jammed. And you decided not to unjam it. Did you see it in the moment as being like...
It was also because it was like 2 a.m. and I had just fired a gun, and I knew my parents were going to be outside. So I like went inside. I put the gun back where it was. And then they're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, nothing. I was just outside." And I think my dad picked up the gun, and he's like, "Why is this cold?" And I was like, "I don't know. I was just outside trying to brush it off." And yeah.
And
Jesus, I'm so sorry.
oh no, you're thankful today the gun was jammed.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know, because I was thinking about this conversation earlier, and I think what I've really come to learn is I will never take my life because I recognize whether or not I don't like myself. I think I care about the people more in my life and know that the tremendous pain and suffering I would cause by doing that, not just for my family, but for my friends. I have a really good group of friends, and we have each other's back. And for me now, doing something like that is leaving them out to dry.
CJ, I'm so grateful for your honesty and candor about this issue, because I think a lot of people have felt this way and they don't talk about it. And I think it's really important and brave.
I appreciate you saying that. Suicide's a terrible plague in the community I'm from. I've lost way too many friends. So it means a lot that you would say that, because if I can make a difference there, I'd love to.
We haven't talked about your sister at all.
Oh.
I assume your sister was aware that she had a brother who was being bullied. What's her experience, or does she...
She's super supportive. I have the best sister on the planet. She's super smart. She's in cognitive sciences. She's actually working in OCS in Bethel, which I'm so proud of my little sister. I definitely feel like even though she's younger than me, she feels like my big sister, because she always was like there to console me despite being 2 years younger than me. But I just feel like we're funny because she's one of the only people on the planet who I've allowed to do this. She'll call me no neck and stuff like that, or she'll like mess with people and she'll be like, "Here's my brother. He doesn't have a neck." And it's this moment we get to share. We make everyone uncomfortable. And if anyone else were to do that, I'd kind of be like, "You did me dirty." But like, I know Tierney is like my best friend, my partner in crime. So yeah, it's hard to really remember a lot of that stuff. But like, she always had my back too. And yeah, I like the irreverence, or just, again, like I was saying, like turning it around and making it like a positive.
Does your family know about the suicide attempts?
Yes and no. We've definitely talked about it. They've definitely been very concerned about it. I don't know if they know about that evening or in totality, other than I took that gun outside. So yeah, I think they do, but maybe not to the extent just that I have had depression and stuff. They
do now.
Yeah. But I think they know where I'm at now. I think they know I'm in a better place. I think I'm in a better place.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here, Andrew.
Were your parents political people?
Not really. Definitely, they have their opinions. Yeah. But not really they didn't organize. They didn't really do much of that. Although I will say, thinking back, my mom definitely raised me in a very feminist home, which is, sorry, Mom, for sharing your business here. She was a Republican for what it's worth, libertarian. But so that was my mom's influence. My dad, on the other hand, very blue collar, but very Democrat, very, I don't want to get too much into detail, but political commercials would come on and my dad would always have commentary about, oh, these people they're just stealing all the money or whatever. Those people beating big companies and whatnot.
Do your parents still have diverse political ideologies?
Not really, actually. They're pretty aligned with my own politics and kind of my own beliefs. So
You went to college in Hawaii?
yes, for 2.5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Did you graduate?
No, I did not. I dropped out and then did a semester at UAA and then dropped out again and I went home. So yeah, I never graduated college.
Growing up in Bethel, did you visit other villages? Did you have awareness of sort of the Alaska Native politics in the region?
I don't know. Like, it's hard to say when the politics start and when life starts. You go to any government conference and they're always like, oh, you know what they say. And like everything in Alaska is political except for politics. That's personal. They say that everywhere. Nonetheless, my mom, as an optometrist, part of her job working for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation was to travel to villages and do visits and whatnot. And she would take me along as a baby. And I don't remember a lot of that, but I established a lot of relationships with people who I still know to this day just from being a baby. And then just later on in high school, there was a lot of programs going on that brought other young people from the villages in. And so like I made a lot of friends that way. So yeah, that's always like been it. And you know, you spend any time on the river going up and down, like you go by a village. And
Right.
ironically, growing up in Bethel, driving was really something to do. And in the wintertime when the ice road was frozen, you could road trip. I've been to Queetluk millions of times simply because it's like a relatively close village and it's usually always plowed. And it's just cool to get out of town and like just go to a store somewhere else and whatnot. So yeah, I definitely, even before politics, just visited a lot of villages.
Can you talk about being a white man representing House District 38?
Sure. Yeah, that's a tremendous question. I think I have a responsibility to recognize that. And when I make statements about my district, being cognizant of the fact that I am, for what it's worth, a visitor, and I will never truly understand the struggle or the lived realities of Alaska Native people. And so for that reason, I think I have a big responsibility to elevate voices in my district as opposed to speak for them. I just try to use the knowledge that I have from a life of experience, but always recognize that like I said, I will never have that viewpoint, but there's a lot of really tremendous leaders in my district that help me just understand things. And like I said, like I can lean on them. Using this position, I think it's important for me to elevate voices, not talk for them, if that answers your question. Mm-hmm. But I really thank you for asking that question. I would even argue like the state as a whole should always ask that question if they're not Alaska Native, which you look at the makeup of our legislature and there should be a lot more. So not to say that anyone is disqualified. I think everyone should come from that lens.
100%. I want to ask about tribal sovereignty. I'm going to pull up a book.
Sure.
This is an issue. It's something I think about all the time. And I recognize that we're two white guys talking about Native issues.
Yeah.
But I have Ned Blackhawk's book, The Rediscovery of America. And I'm just going to read the first sentence. How can a nation founded on the homelands of dispossessed indigenous peoples be the world's most exemplary democracy? What does it mean for me to say that I live on stolen land if I'm going to continue to live on stolen land? And you've already referenced the fact that in this building we have so few Alaska Native leaders, so few Alaska Native staff, so few Alaska Native input in what we do. I don't know. I don't know if you can comment on it at all. It's just something I think about all the time. And I don't really know how to process.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm trying to find the question there. Just kidding. That sounds snooty. I apologize. But No, I think that really strikes at the core, I think, of really the disconnect that I've seen a lot is it costs nothing to say something like that. It costs nothing to put a resolution out or something like that. I think where the real change and the progress is in making changes that literally empower tribal sovereignty. So having tribal input, requiring that tribal input. And I'm really thankful for the era that we're in right now, especially in Alaska. Like we had the tribal recognition bill. We are seeing finally, and it's insane to me. It blows my mind that over 200 years, it's taken that long for the rightful stewards, owners, people who have lived here for millennia, or for all of time for that matter, that it's taken that long for them to simply get recognition. That's completely unacceptable. We have a lot of work to do. And I think that tribal sovereignty needs to be taken seriously. Tribal entities need to have the power given back to them. And they need to be like, it's not just a matter of having a seat at the table. I think they should run the table. You know what I mean? Like that. I think that's where the real like change comes, but I'm not necessarily saying that in response to what you read.
No,
That's
I
like
understand
really, that's something that I would have
what
to
you're
digest
saying,
quite a
and
bit.
I just think there's something that's very condescending is not really the right word, but maybe like
Performative, maybe
more like when you're treating somebody like a small child.
patronizing.
Patronizing.
Yeah.
There's something very patronizing about giving folks recognition, about giving folks a symbolic seat at the table, where the people who continue to make the important decisions are not Alaska Native.
Yeah, and I hope that's what you understood me to mean. Like when I say seat at the table, I mean like a voting member. Like they make the decisions.
Right. It reminds me of something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said when she was asked how many women there needed to be on the Supreme Court, and she said 9. Making the point that for hundreds of years, the entire Supreme Court was men.
Right.
So why not have all women for a certain period of time? It's the same thing with Alaska, at least from the sale of 1867, the sale that we've really been led by white men, and we're led by white men today. And why not all the people at the table not be white men? Do you know what I mean?
And I support that wholeheartedly. I really do. I really believe that.
Let's talk about how you got involved in politics. I know you got involved in Bethel politics to begin with. I assume that was after some time at UAA and then coming back.
Yeah. So I've always been politically interested. I feel cheesy or weird bringing up high school, but I'm 26, so I think it's a little bit more okay for me to do this. Yeah, I just was always politically minded. I was very involved in student council in my high school, which that too actually felt like it held a lot of weight. Our school would participate a lot in ASOG, and so we would write
ASOG?
Alaska Association of Student Governments. And so we would write resolutions and bring resolutions to this conference, and those resolutions would actually have a chance at impacting policy that was being implemented in our schools. And one example, if I recall correctly, the group of student council kids who went to the conference, we passed a resolution essentially saying that abstinence curriculum is inadequate, and that in order to combat the high rates of STDs and STIs that permeate the YK Delta, we need real good sex ed education that talks about STIs and STDs and like how to be in safe relationships and so on. And that is the world that I came from. So
were y'all successful?
Yeah, we passed it at ASOG. I don't quite remember what or how that played out on the school level.
Do you remember getting abstinence education?
Not really, but I feel like if I did, it would be very easy to forget. But young people are going to have sexual relationships. telling them not to is not going to help anything, and just saying don't do it and cutting it off at that, I think we're putting kids in danger.
And I know this is like very anecdotal, but I say making it more forbidden for a young person can actually have the undesired effect of making it more exciting and more desirable.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm curious if you have data that backs that up.
Anecdotal, just
really,
like me. I'm just saying, like, if you tell me that I'm absolutely not allowed to do something,
yeah.
then I really think about what.
I feel like I could continue on with talking about my political journey. I didn't get into city government right after college. After college, I had worked like 5 jobs.
And you were back in the village.
I was back in Bethel. Yeah,
I know it's not a village when you're 22.
Say again.
When you're like 22.
Yeah, so I was back there working 5 jobs. Like I cleaned hotels, which I actually really enjoyed. I sold rippies, which was...
What are rippies?
So scratch offs. And then I eventually landed a job with YKHC, Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, which was like really great because as much as I really enjoyed and still fond for working 5 jobs, it was never a clear schedule. It was never professional. And I actually enjoy the professional components of working for YK. So I worked for YK for 2 years, and the person that I worked with, I won't name them, but they were on the city council at the time. And so they were somebody that I grew up with, and they mystified a lot of it because I always saw it as something unattainable and heavy on information I knew nothing about. But seeing him do it and hearing his inferences on it and just knowing him as a regular person, he planted the seed in my head. If I really work on this, this is maybe something I can strive for. At the height of the pandemic, swirling around the whole George Floyd incident and stuff like that, I just found myself really frustrated, really angry about injustice, and just looking at that through a lens of growing up in Bethel and the things that I had seen, like my friends subjected to and stuff like that. And with this big moment in American, like, history, frankly, where these things are being brought to light and it felt like a real, like, change, I was like, I need to get on city council. Like, I need to make these points known to the council because, and this is a very ignorant perspective, I know looking back on it now, but at the time I felt like that conversation was devoid from what they were talking about. And then also just the fact that I was young, and I think there needs to be more young representation in government in general. So I ended up running for city council. I thought I got all the paperwork in, but then the night before the election, the city clerk was like, hey, there's one piece you didn't get in. And because you didn't get it in on time, you're not going to be on the ballot. And I was so miffed and so upset. And I feel so bad because our city clerk is the sweetest lady on the planet. I was just like, all right, I'm going to give this a shot as a write-in. It's Bethel. I still have a chance. So I went down on election day and had painted signs and just stood there on the corner with write-in CJ McCormick. And I have to say, doing that every time I had ran for an election and stood on the corner on election day, like all these fears that I have that people don't like me as a leader just go away. It is such a good feeling to see people super supportive and so on. Anyways, I didn't win the election. I lost about 17 votes.
Oh.
But a very good friend of mine was on the city council, and I think she was moving to Kodiak, if I'm not mistaken. And her seat opened up. That afforded me the opportunity to file for her seat.
And turn all the papers in correctly.
Yeah, exactly. So I was on at that time. Yeah, then I finished out her term, which I think was like a year. Election came around. I was up for re-election, and not to brag, but I got like the most votes out of anybody, and eventually was appointed vice mayor.
How long did you serve in local government before you decided to run for House?
Man, it's difficult. I feel like 2020 to 2022, so 2 years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then did Tiffany Zukowski approach you? Tiffany Zukowski is your immediate predecessor in the State House. Or did you just find out that it was going to be open?
Yeah, she didn't really approach me until I had declared. I wasn't planning on running, actually. I hope that's not bad to admit, but I wasn't really planning on running until I was approached by some people. I think they just reached out to me because I was vice mayor. And I had the assumption at the time, and I hope I'm not speaking on behalf of Mark, but I thought Mark Springer was going to do it.
Mark Springer is the current mayor of Bethel.
I didn't realize really till very late that Tiffany wasn't refiling to run. I also know that our former representative, Bob Heron, had also filed to run as well. I called Mark, and he was more or less told me he couldn't. And then I was like, oh no, this means I have to run now. No disrespect to Bob. I think Bob would have done a fine job. This was like an opportunity that I needed to take. Opportunities like this present themselves when you're not ready. If you sit around waiting for them, they're going to pass you by. So it was just like a couple hours, just like really working it through my head, making phone calls. Should I do this? Should I do this? And then I ended up doing it. So yeah.
And you've been here for a year. What's the experience been like for you?
It's been crazy. It has really been crazy, to a point at which it is difficult to encapsulate it all and really look back and say like a lot of specific things about it, just because I feel like it's been like a bunch of different lifetimes and it's difficult to remember it all. Going into the second session now, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot more confident. I feel a lot more comfortable just knowing like how things work, knowing the people that I work with better. So it's just been a big, humongous learning experience, which I'm sure is the same for you, but I'm still learning some of life's lessons in general as a 26-year-old, and just balancing that with being a legislator can be difficult, but I just feel great. I feel great having a little bit of personal pride in that. Like, I'm balancing these things, and I think I'm doing okay. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
We were at a conference together, and we were talking to a group of legislators from other states. There was a comment made about one of our independent legislators, whose name I will not say. And I said, oh, that's funny. They may call themselves an independent, but they're to the left of me and CJ. And you took offense to that. And of course, you're like, to the left of me? Something like that. And I said, I was like, you're in a Republican majority. And of course, to this person from another state, they were like, what?
Yeah.
And so that was my long way of bringing up like being a Democrat and a Republican dominated majority, and how do you navigate that?
I kind of feel like I just reject partisanship. I refuse to operate in that capacity, which can be very difficult because people definitely, that's their guiding principle. I just think partisanship is a waste of time. I think it is just destructive to our government. I think really what it boils down to as a kid from Bethel is partisanship, like, is a privilege. It's a privilege afforded to communities that have immense amounts of resources. We don't have those resources at our disposal. I feel like in a lot of ways we are like in a constant state of survival, and we need to do what we can to get resources. I have schools falling into a river. I'm not going to let that school fall into a river because I feel like I'm more progressive and I align myself with more progressive ideals. Because I don't really like to pigeonhole myself. I don't really like to say that I'm progressive or whatever. I just like to say I'm from Bethel, or I'm CJ. That's how I prefer to approach things. It's difficult at times, but it's just really the necessity, I think, of just, we have to work together. And I think that is a mentality that we all have in rural Alaska. You'll hear it from Mary, and she can speak on this much better than I can.
I would say in order for me to function well in this job, I find myself saying things like, you give me 1,400 BSA, I'll vote yes on all your shitty policies. I literally will go that far because I can see what kind of value I can get. I just have found that I'm not nearly as hardline as I thought I was.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I think that if you really want to move the state forward, you need to be willing to make deals.
Yeah.
If you're not making deals, nothing is happening.
Our government is designed in a way to move slowly. And I think we have a responsibility to recognize and figure out how to operate within the system as it's currently constructed. Respectfully, I just think those kind of politics aren't, like, they don't work within the confines of the system, right? Like, I might be left, but I recognize I have to be more center. And for me, it's a matter of naming my price. What is something too far? That's something I struggle with a lot. I don't want to be bought, but there's just some things that I've like taken a backseat on because, like, in the grand scheme, like, doing one thing leads to bigger and better things in another. I don't know. But
right.
It's really something I struggle with.
For me, if I look at it, if I'm going to help 138,000 kids, I just keep my eye on that. That's a lot of kids. And so I can make some compromises that I maybe before didn't think I could ever make because I'll do it for 138,000 kids.
Exactly. No, I'm completely with you, but I think that's an interesting issue. It's like, what's being wagered? What's being wagered? Because I think there's a lot of really dangerous scenarios that can be like pitted against each other. There are some things that I will not accept as needing to compromise. So,
are you willing to say what you're not willing to compromise on?
I'm not going to say I want a big BSA. Trans kids have to be like degraded. I'm not going to do that. That's violence, as far as I'm concerned. That's violence. You are like asking me to pick which form of violence do you prefer. You know what I mean? So that is the line that I will not cross. So that's just one example. The leading cause of preventable death in the state of Alaska for young people is suicide. And so in the context of like 105...
House Bill 105, which is the governor's, as I call it, don't be trans bill.
I just think it just further creates a situation where people feel like they can't be themselves and they can't be honest to themselves and have to be someone they're not and have to live, I think, in contrast to who they really want to be. And for that reason, they don't want to be alive anymore.
Do you have any firsthand knowledge of anyone committing suicide because of that?
Yeah, I won't use their name because I don't think that's right. But the only openly gay person that I was aware of
in Bethel
that I went to high school with took their own life either at their senior year or after they had graduated. And I think a lot of it had to do with just the social pressure to be someone that they weren't. We've moved past the thinking of 105. I think what I've been really encouraged by is there's more acceptance of people. And it was funny because I was saying like people were shoved into the closet, and I feel like there's been like a sea change, right, in public consciousness and whatnot. And there was never like a big like coming out of people, but it's just like naturally people have been allowed to be themselves in a public space. And I think that's been really good for a lot of people.
And what I've tried to frame it as, and haven't done a very good job of, but my thinking about it is that I think what some of the opponents of free LGBTQ expression is that there's actually more freedom for everyone. More freedom for everyone to be whoever they want to be and not have to fit into any little boxes. It's breaking the boxes open. Even for the people who criticize this and wish that it was a more strict binary, all of that's being broken. And that's more freedom for all.
Yeah, and I always find that strange why freedom people want to tell other people what they can do in their personal lives or how they can express themselves in a very dumb way. I just want to be like, why do you care? Like, why do you care? And I know it's more nuanced than that, but really, can we just please move on from this and actually argue about things that are substantive?
So, you are young. Do you have an idea of where you want to be in 10 years, 20 years? Do you have a plan?
Loosely. I've never been one for having a big plan. In fact, I've bombed some interviews before because they've been like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I'm like, I don't know. And I used to beat myself up over that, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think like I just approach life in a way I want to be comfortable with the way things are and not fuss too much about trying to force myself into a certain situation. However, in the context, I think, of being a legislator, I do think I have a responsibility to recognize when I've been around for a long time and things are getting stale and maybe consider moving on to the Senate. That obviously depends. I will gladly say on the record that I'm not going to run against Lyman Hoffman. Lyman brings a tremendous amount of experience and really has been a pillar for my district. So I'm not going to do that. That is something I'm thinking about way down the line. But I am like creating like term limits for myself because I do think it's wrong to an extent to just say, I'm going to do this forever. If the situation calls for it and I can be of value to my district, then yeah, it takes a long time to change stuff. And so I don't really want to like just stop for the sake of stopping. But after that, I don't know. That's the part of the pool I haven't even been to yet. Who knows? Who knows what happens and what I learn and glean as I continue to grow in this position. But yeah, we'll just have to take it from there.
Do you have a book that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I want to break the rules a little bit with your permission. I want to recommend 2 books. Okay, so the first one is Hard Times by Studs Terkel. I think that's just an incredibly powerful book. I think just if you want to be like a writer or a journalist, like I think that's a super cool approach to writing and very inspirational in that way. I go back to it time and time again. I've read it numerous times, and just the perspectives gleaned from living through the Great Depression or being impacted by the Great Depression are like so fascinating, so useful in so many ways. I feel like that book is just so good because it's taught me about really granular life stuff, but then also just outlooks on life. I will always plug that, but Raven's Gift by Don Reardon. If you want to know something about rural Alaska, if you want to know something about where I came from, I think that's just a great read. It's creepy, it's scary, it's like a post-apocalyptic book, but I have never, aside from like firsthand accounts of Bethel, and I just really appreciate that book for the way that it encapsulated so many of the things that we're up against. I also grew up the road from Don, so Don is a hero for me.
TJ McCormick, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, of course. It was my pleasure, Andrew.
Now, for the legislative update for Monday, January 29th, 2024. Most of the oxygen in the Capitol last week was taken up by Senate Bill 140. This bill, as it started off, sponsored by Senator Lyman Hoffman, was a mechanism for improving internet connectivity in rural schools. But after a raise to the base student allocation, which is the way we fund our schools in Alaska, was added in House Finance. And then after this bill went to the House Rules Committee, where there was several big changes made, including adding language that changed the way charter schools are approved, essentially giving the state much, much more power over local school boards in terms of determining which charter schools should be established. This bill has become something much larger and more significant. It was expected that the new version of Senate Bill 140 would hit the House floor on Friday in second reading. It would be at that time that the representatives would have the opportunity to modify the bill further, add amendments. But at the last minute, the bill was removed from the calendar. It was not brought to the floor, and we are not sure when that bill will be heard on the floor. Today, I have a bill being read across the floor for the first time. That bill, which we are calling the Alcoholic Beverages and Cancer Bill, would require all points of sale for alcohol to display signage that alcohol can cause cancer, including breast and colon cancer. The language would be added to our existing pregnancy warning, so this wouldn't be an additional sign, just an additional sentence to an existing sign. Thomas Gramillon, Director of Food Policy at Consumer Federation of America, states, "Cancers caused by alcohol kill tens of thousands of Americans each year. At the same time, survey after survey shows that fewer than half of adults are aware that alcohol increases cancer risk. One survey showed that 10% of adults think drinking wine decreases cancer risk. It does not. Drinking any type of alcohol, even small amounts, increases cancer risk." End quote. According to the American Cancer Society, alcohol use represents the third and fourth leading cause of cancer for women and men, respectively. For some cancers, even light or moderate drinking significantly increases risk. For example, researchers estimate that consuming one standard drink per day is associated with a 4% increase in breast cancer risk, and drinking 2 to 4 drinks per day with a 23% increased risk. The World Health Organization first documented the link between alcohol and a variety of cancers in 1987. Researchers estimate that cancers associated with alcohol consumption affect nearly 90,000 Americans each year. Despite these impacts, surveys from all over show that fewer than half of adults know that alcohol increases cancer risk. The alcohol industry has sought to cast doubt on the scientific consensus that alcohol causes cancer for decades, but the evidence only gets stronger. The disconnect between alcohol's contribution to cancer risk and the lack of consumer awareness about that risk is why I brought this bill forward.
If this bill passes, we will begin warning Alaskans about this very important risk to their health. I want Alaskans to make informed decisions, and honestly, the less alcohol you drink, the better for your health.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact my office, email rep.andrew.gray@aklag.gov or call 907-465-4940.